One of the reasons that I was so interested in this subject is when I was a police officer myself, a very long time ago, in the 1980s, one of the first calls I ever went to with my sergeant as a probationer was a call from a 16-year-old girl who had been hit in the head with a lump hammer by her boyfriend. But she was sitting there with probably a fractured skull, I would have thought. And she wouldn't take any help. So why? Why in those particular circumstances was she being what my sergeant called bloody awkward? On balance, it was safer not to go to hospital. It was safer for her not to get that fractured skull looked at. That's a remarkable decision, isn't it? Think about what must have been going on in her head then to make that decision not to look after her health, because he was more dangerous than the fractured skull. That's the headline from that, isn't it? He was more dangerous than the fractured skull. I want you to look at this, which was in the Birmingham Mail recently. This is that victims are awkward perspective, isn't it? Now, that is extreme. But I wanted to look at it from the other side. Quote from one of the victims that I spoke with: "I try not to go to the doctor and I never call the police." So the other side is we hear stories of chronic fear, an absolute feeling of dread all the time. Domestic abuse through coercive control creates what is called chronic fear. A lot of women who are high risk for homicide do aggressively seek help. They may not go to the police and say, "Look, I want this man prosecuted." But practically every homicide we see a little trail where the woman has disclosed that she is terrified of the person who is abusing her. I'll just want to talk about Raoul Moat. Now, this man advertised that he was going to kill his partner. And she was saying, "He is going to kill me when he gets out." But they still let him out. And he went, got some help, got some mates, and he went round there and he shot her new partner, and he shot her, killed the new partner, didn't kill her. And we all know what happened to David Rathband after that. These homicides are largely predictable. I'm not saying that we can stop every single one, but if we started taking some of the highest risk factors a lot more seriously, we might get some way towards that. Just a second case. I don't know if you would have heard of this case or not. Emily was only 17 years old when Elliot Turner murdered her. Now, he said he was going to kill her. In fact, he went to his friends and said, "I'm going to kill Emily. I'm going to strangle her. Can I practice on you?" And they said, "Okay." And he did. He practiced strangulation on his friends. Now, I don't think for 1 minute that his friends thought that he was serious. They thought, it's just him acting up, he's just being stupid, he's not really going to kill Emily. Well, he did. And then his parents lied for him as well. More solidarity. So his friends were saying, "Yeah, practice on me." And then after he'd killed her, in his parents' house, where he was staying, they destroyed evidence for him to help him. The point, I suppose, with this whole solidarity and everything like that is, really, we don't really take it seriously enough. We need to start taking it seriously, start believing victims, and start recognising where the dangers are. Not every domestic is dangerous. We need to start recognising which domestic situations, if you like, are dangerous. How do you get rid of it? And the answer was absolutely simple. Raise the status of it. I'm just going to very briefly talk about how domestic abuse and domestic abuse victims lose status. So first of all, it's not got the status of criminal behaviour. So domestic abuse itself is not a named crime, but they have done it with stalking. That is a pattern of behaviour which has been written into law. So the precedent has been somewhat set there now, and it's quite possible in the future that domestic abuse will be a named crime. So we don't give an awful lot of status to the most dangerous behaviours. We still have this belief that violence is the best predictor of homicide, when actually it is not. Control is the best predictor. So I'm just going to quickly go through some statistics. Some countries, up to 71% of women will experience abuse. Here in England, it's about 25%. In Scotland, around 33%. The biggest predictor for domestic homicide is being female. Women 9 times more likely to be killed by their partner than a stranger. Most common form of non-fatal injury, most common cause of traumatic death in pregnant and postpartum women, and very often women in danger will present to A&E departments, even though not always there is an injury. Of those who do get injured, they quite often at some point will end up in A&E. So deaths still running at 2 a week in this country, not really changing. But also we have the worrying statistic that here between 4 and 10 women a week are committing suicide because of domestic abuse. And of course the financial cost is a big political motivator. An IPF is an intimate partner femicide. Each one costs £1.1 million. Domestic abuse takes 3% of the entire NHS budget. £24 billion overall when you count in the criminal justice response as well. So, last point I would like to make. Begin an investigation of domestic abuse with the assumption that the victim is not going to help you. Search for the evidence yourself. Get other people to support the prosecution. But if you just go in there, if she does support you, brilliant. But go in there with the assumption that she's not going to. And then you may perhaps pick up evidence you wouldn't have thought of before. I'm just going to leave you with this last slide. Thank you very much for listening to me. If there's any questions, I can answer them now, and there will be a chance to ask questions at the end. Otherwise, you can now take a 10-minute break.
Good afternoon, folks. Am I nervous today? Yes, I am a bit. But let me tell you something. Whenever I feel nervous, I always think of the groups of people behind me. And one group of people behind this shoulder are the dead people. And there's 1,000 women since my sister and nephew were murdered 11 years ago. There's 1,000 more women joined them in the graveyard. And they don't have a voice anymore. So they help me get over my nerves. And behind this shoulder, I think of living victims who've effectively got sellotape across their mouths. They don't have a platform, they very often don't have a voice, or they can't tell anyone because they'll get killed. Now, has anybody been to a domestic violence conference in Belfast? I spoke at one last November, and a police officer spoke late in the afternoon, And they have a different sense of humour over there. This guy got up and he said he'd just come from a wedding, and the vicar had said, let's call them Jane and Patrick. Congratulations, Jane and Patrick, you're now husband and wife. Enjoy your evening, because tomorrow morning you're going to wake up and face the person most likely to kill you. I can't believe the vicar said that, can you? He's technically wrong, because a man is more likely to be killed by another man. But for the woman, he was right. But I still don't believe he said it. I run a charity called Advocacy after fatal domestic abuse, which I set up about 5 years after my sister and nephew were murdered, because lots of families kept contacting me. I was verbose, I was in the papers, I was challenging. And they said, how are you doing this? How is that happening? And I started to help them. I was challenging coroners, police, all sorts of things. I had murder in my family, double murder, and then the suicide of the perpetrator. And I've worked with many agencies. I still meet Thames Valley Police, which was the police force in my family's case, 11 years after I first met them to report domestic violence with my sister, or 12 years since we reported it. I started meeting them in 2008 properly, once the review was published, and they thought that was it. I'm still meeting them. It's a good, healthy, robust relationship in which we exchange views about how to police domestic violence. I've always said I am no use to them if I get the absolute detail of policing. I'll just start making excuses for them. I have to come in with other ideas and stick to ideal principles, the Peel principles. Why, and keep that pressure on. And it works. And I think any mature organisation welcomes challenge. Absolutely, and all of us should do. Just some background on the gender. Can I just say, does everybody get the gendered nature of domestic abuse? Yes, men do get abused, and yes, they get abused by women, by the way. But it is not in the same numbers, the research says. You've only got to look at the homicide statistics as well. About 4 to 1, women killed by men and the other way around. But also, if you don't get the gendered nature, think of it this way. Women are not serially raped, sexually abused and stalked in the home, like women are by men. But also the fear that men put in women, and Jane mentioned this. I have seen that, and I always remember in my sister's eyes when she told me about the fear that she experienced. I remember how profound that felt, and I will be very honest with you today. I used to struggle to say this years ago because I was ashamed to admit to feeling physically violent in the domestic violence sector. But I did feel physically violent towards the perpetrator when my sister told me the fear that that man had put in her. So much fear that she could not call me the night she believed she was going to be killed. So here is some research done by Professor Marion Hester. Domestic homicides, they do rarely come out of the blue, you know, and I've always said with domestic homicide reviews, I get a lot of chairs write to me and say, there's no contact with agencies, absolutely no indication of domestic abuse, he just woke up one day and killed her. And I said, that's so unlikely. Find the trail of pain, find the history, find the missed opportunities for that individual to report it. Well, a homicide review I looked at recently in which a lady told her friend, here are my passwords to my email account and my Facebook. The only way out of my relationship is in a body bag, which it was 3 months later. Imagine knowing you're going to be murdered and unable to see a way out of it. These men are so obsessive. My sister said, if I leave, I just delay it. He will find me wherever I go, wherever I go. So I do think that there is a lack of understanding in agencies on when you can share information. Not appreciating the compromises faced by victims. If somebody is dancing around a psychopath and they're staying alive because they've got the wit and agency about them to know what to say and do to keep that person from not killing them that day, and then they get some professional on the doorstep, as Jane said, saying, "Follow me, I'll keep you safe." And I saw a review, a recently quality assured one, in which the chair, he should have known better, this individual. He said, this woman is controlled by this man. He's in and out of jail. Even when he's in jail, she's being controlled by the fear that he can put in her. She knows the consequences. Doesn't matter that he's in jail at the moment, he's coming out in a few months. She knows the consequences. So he recognised in the report that it was not simplistic for her to seek help. And yet he concluded that all the services available, she chose not to use them. Rubbish. He'd forgotten his earlier part of the report. So here's a good quote from Evan Stark. Some of my most fearful and subjugated clients had never been assaulted. My sister Julia and my nephew William. Julia was 47, murdered, 4 shotgun blasts at point blank, and he punched her beforehand. The only time that we have evidence that he ever punched her in 22 years of marriage. That's interesting, isn't it? So we think that's the only time he punched her. But the abuse was coercive control. And my nephew, 5 shotgun blasts, his son, their son. He then, 49 years old, Alan Pemberton, committed suicide. Now my sister had tried to leave before, and he begged. You're familiar with this one? Got down on his knees and begged, crying. We've heard that so many times, haven't we? The abuse was mental control. That slide alone tells you a lot about domestic violence, doesn't it? Then I will decide, not us, I will decide. Who's the controller here? We got some facts out of this review. Critically, for my family, it showed how hard my sister tried to get help. I just want to end by leaving you with a question. I think I have got a platform to say very honestly what I think and believe, but I also want to be balanced, and I really mean those words. And I just ask you, please, to consider those points, and thank you very much for listening.
Well, can I ask you what you draw from these lectures and what you hope your officers will?
I think this afternoon has been hugely powerful, and I'm hoping that the vast majority of our staff have been to see and hear this stuff. I think 2 or 3 things for me. One is hearing about and understanding better chronic fear. So, you know, something that's ongoing, that's going to affect somebody's life, which is different to at the time you might be in fear of being punched or whatever it else. And that's really, really important. Secondly is the notion of the individual's life actually being controlled. And it's that fear that controls the life. So whilst violence might be part of it, it's the fear that controls the life, so the individual can't make proper choices for themselves. And then that's the understanding the risk factors that there are. And I think that all of our officers, all of our frontline staff have got a personal responsibility to take this seriously and understand what those risk factors are, and to believe people when they say that they're victims. There might be a whole host of reasons why people don't choose to leave, and that's really complex, but they have to be believed and they have to be treated seriously.